So I got your email and
Yeah.
did a little research to get around it. But why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, so I suppose it was in response to doing some reading and some studying about Advaita Vedanta, and reading Eckhart Tolle, and reading Thai Nhat Hanh. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, but and kind of listening to those different formulations and seeing a lot of connection between them, but also being aware that maybe some of that connection might be misunderstanding on my part. So the Advaita Vedanta perspective, as I understand it, is that we suffer because we identify with a small self ego, and that we are actually, that is an illusory self, and that the much deeper reality that masks is that we are all one, what it would within that tradition would call all Brahma. Everything is Brahma. But I'm wondering if everything is Brahma is actually fairly similar to the conclusion that one comes to from a Buddhist perspective if one follows dependent origination through to its logical conclusion, which is formulated by Thai Nhat Hanh, I think very nicely as interbeing. The idea that if everything is causally connected and dependent and inter is with everything, then everything ultimately is one, and that is the kind of ultimate reality that non-self and impermanence kind of point to. And I'm wondering how similar that is to that idea of Advaita Vedanta, that everything is Brahma. Are they just sort of different formulations of the same idea? Because not only is the view seemingly quite similar, but the practice is quite similar within those traditions. And also, I suppose the follow on from that question was the kind of goal of those traditions. In Advaita Vedanta, the formulation is Sat Chit Ananda, being consciousness bliss. Is that the same as nirvana within the Buddhist tradition? Because my understanding is that in the Buddhist tradition, Buddha is always sort of quite stum. He's quite silent about the goal almost. He just says it's not this. Am I right in saying that? Like he's quite almost tight-lipped about it. He doesn't want to put into words that much what is beyond words.
Actually, no. He spent 45 years talking.
Yes, but in terms, yes, good point. But in terms of the goal of practice, in terms of what nibbana is,
a lot of it had to do with language.
Yeah, well, the limitations thereof.
All right, so let me have a crack at the question. First off, the Vedantas are Indian. So would Buddha. That the Vedantas look like that they, it's actually a major aspect. You could say that it's like 1/6 of, or one of the 6 main views of Hinduism.
Yeah.
And why then would it be considered Hinduism? Because it looks like that it's got very, very loose links to Hinduism and very strong links to the teachings of the Buddha.
Yeah, Sankara was criticized, wasn't he, as being a Buddhist by his contemporaries, the kind of person who started Advaita Vedanta.
He ought to have been.
Yeah.
And that when you see, here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand, and that is that in that time, throughout a number of hundreds of years, there was quite a lot of interaction.
Mm.
And that interaction then we see today, and we think that we're going to have things cut directly, almost as if we expect to, let us say, a birth lineage. I don't know quite the right word for it, but a family tree. We expect the family tree to be organized and sufficient because it's got one mom and one dad. And family trees wind up being sometimes a whole lot more confused than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm getting at is that don't look at it as if it were confusion, but rather a lot of cross connections.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that you can see with the Vedantas is in fact what they were trying to do is they were trying to withdraw themselves from Hinduism, but not go too far.
Mm.
While at the same time, and during those same periods of time, there was a lot of influence trying to get Buddhism to come join in with and become part of the Hinduism.
Mm.
Because Buddhism started as an absolute rebellion
Mm-hmm.
against the Brahmins. And so whenever we're using the word Brahma or Brahmin, we have to be careful of what are we talking about. That I can give you three different definitions. One would be that we're talking about Brahmin people who belong to the Brahmin caste, and possibly even have a set of belief systems
Mm-hmm.
that could be called Brahmanism. All right. The second kind of Brahmin would be part of that belief system in the sense that there is a Brahmin or a god or something that they know about, and they know more about it than other people do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then the third description of the Brahma is the big all, the big dude, the really good stuff that does not have distance squared.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That almost in all the physical world, everything that we know about all of physics is whenever you have distance between two objects, the formulation always has distances squared, which means the further away something is, the very quickly it gets really distant in the sense of it being able to have any effect, either through electromagnetic. But when we look at the end point of the big Brahma, the big all, is that it's so expansive that that distance squared is not an issue.
Mm.
But that what we're looking more at is the issue of locality. So how you experience the big Brahma is how you experience your own locality.
Mm.
Because you have to experience in one of two ways, either through direct experience through the senses, or to have those senses heightened by, let us say, concepts. And what I'm actually getting at is that this big Brahma that we're talking about both exists in reality, and it also exists as a concept. And that humans normally address it and talk about it as if it were a concept because it's very difficult to get directly in touch with it.
Mm.
And that the only way to get really directly in touch with it is by being here now in this present moment.
Mm. I was going to say what you're
Because
saying is quite similar to the Eckhart Tolle formulation about presence and
I wonder where he got his stuff.
well, he got it from Advaita Vedanta, and the idea is that Sankara was
Before,
getting it from the Buddha as well.
Eckhart Tolle got it directly from his own experience. And after he had the experience of it, that's when he started conceptualizing about it so that he could talk about it to the people
Yeah.
about the experience that he had. So you got that backwards.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, no, that's an important point.
Sure.
Because almost all of the world is living in that world. Even if they believe in the big Brahma, they still only believe in it in the sense that it's a concept. It's not real to them yet.
Mm.
And yet this is what that present moment is supposed to become, that it becomes so expansive because we're not taking on any individual object, that we just let the mind float in consciousness. So that at 1 second we're looking at how the wind is blowing on the leg, and the next consciousness we're looking at the little mouse icon on the screen, and the next one we're hearing the sound of whatever, or now I can feel the ear, and it just moves everywhere. And the more we keep the consciousness unfocused, that in fact each one of those things that I mentioned was moving from object to object, I had to focus on it long enough to describe it. But we're talking about unfocus so that we begin to just open ourselves up to the reality of what's going on in its greatest sense. And we find that we become overwhelmed with a flood of sensual input. But that normally the human mind doesn't work like that. The normal way that the human mind works is by focusing on an object, perceiving it so that we can understand what it is, so that we can put a marker on it, give it a name, give it some kind of understanding, and put it into a classification. Is this safe or not? Is this dangerous, or am I okay with it? And you'd be surprised at how many tens of millions of things get put into that classification that is dangerous. Where in fact, there's very little that's dangerous. And so when we come out of classifying things as dangerous or not, then we can begin to get completely open. This would be called what you could say is objectlessness. So you don't have any object, but that the senses themselves are constantly opening, constantly flooding the mind with new input, and the mind is doing what it can to absorb all of the grandiosity of that input, and we go into a state of awe, a state of being overwhelmed with the reality of the moment. So we take it out of the concept, but here's the thing about that concept is that we can actually use that conceptual idea when we're talking about it one another, is to invite each other, if we know how to say it, into that state of awe, into that state of experience. But it's not an experience, because it can be recreated in the here now anytime that you have the skills to do it. So it's not a one-time experience that we have and now we're woken up, but more is the process of how often can we get into that state of awe, into that state of enormous satisfaction.
So would you say that's the view of awakening in both of those traditions is ultimately pointing towards that same state?
Exactly. And that's why I sent to you that point about moksha. Real freedom is knowledge of Brahma. And you are Brahma. Thou art that.
Yeah. Which is very similar to the suchness.
Exactly.
That formulation.
Tatata, that's the name that the Buddha gave himself, was tatata. That's how important that be here now quality is that's what he called himself. He did not call himself awakened. He did not call himself Buddha. He called himself tatata. the one who is here now, the one who is awake,
Mm.
gone to thusness,
Mm.
gone to the reality of the moment. So all of these old traditions are basically the same thing, pointing in the same direction, but doing it with slight bending of vocabulary and whatnot, which winds up making it really confusing for most students to begin with, because they look at the differences in the vocabulary rather than being able to cut right to the core of seeing these guys are talking about the same thing.
Mm.
But they're doing it with different language. They're doing it out of different contexts. They're doing it with four and two different audiences. But ultimately, this is the religious experience, if you think about it, in the sense that, in this regard, the word religion is basically Latin, which means to bind together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in this regard, what that means is it's going to help you bind yourself to reality,
Mm.
to have knowledge of the Brahma, because you are the Brahma. You're in it. This is
Mm.
it. This is it, babe. And yet we don't have a language for it. And when we try to invent a language, we wind up with Buddha or the Vedanta or Eckhart Tolle or uh, whatever any old good Dhamma dude will say to get you on the path to go to that state of enormous satisfaction. It also has an enormous quality of success to it. I mean, after all, if you think about it this way, um, based upon that joke, the joke about the Dalai Lama was in New York and he went to the hot dog stand and he says, "Make me one with everything."
No, I don't know the joke. What's the punchline?
That's the
Oh,
punchline.
make
Make
me
me
one
one
with
with
everything. Oh my God, that
everything.
took me a minute. Yeah, that's good.
No, the change, that's a separate joke. That's joke number two. The first
Yeah.
joke is really funny. Make me one with everything. Well, if that is the goal, then
Mm.
doesn't that make you feel enormously satisfied that you can actually reach that goal?
Mm.
Yeah, enormously successful. We're the lion, the roar of the Buddha. The Buddha
Mm.
was also known not just to be Tathagata, he was known as a lion, and it's talked about. There's a number of different suttas
Mm.
about the lion's roar and why he's a lion. And part of that is that it's basically like this. That I'm going to say it in a different language than is in the sutras. But the Buddha would say, "Hey, dude, anytime there's a group of dudes around, I'm the one that they all listen to. Don't
Mm.
nobody have a chance to talk but me when I'm around." Now that's paraphrasing it a bit, but that's basically what the Buddha was saying: is that I'm the one who is the head of the assembly,
Mm.
and so that becomes that attitude. But that attitude is because you have become successful at that which takes you to the highest quality of humanity,
Mm.
and that's kind of an amazing point.
Mm.
Because look at what all people are normally doing. They're saying, "Oh, if I have more money than he does, then I'm a better guy." Or,
Mm.
"Oh, if I have more girls than he does." Or, "Oh, if I've got a faster car." Or, "Oh, if I have two PhDs instead of one." Or
Mm.
whatever it is that we compete with each other on. This one winds up being no competition left. That there's no reason to compete with anyone anymore.
Mm. Well,
And so
competing
that's
with
when we
people presupposes two separate competing selves, doesn't it?
exactly so.
Mm.
And so this is also the quality of friendship, that when we stop competing with people because we're all in this together, we
Mm.
start making friends instead. We're friendly with everyone because we're not competing with anyone.
Mm.
because we don't want anything from anyone, because we're satisfied with sitting in the lap of Brahma, if you want to use that language.
That sense of unity, that sense of oneness, I feel like in the last 6 weeks or so, I've had more experience of that feeling. And it's either been looking at a tree, walking down a road, looking into someone's eyes, dancing with someone. There's been quite a few experiences where that sense of unity, presence, and awe has been present. But then immediately, or not necessarily immediately, soon after, the projecting into the future, the analyzing the past, and the suffering, like quite potentially low level, but ever present, seemingly comes back.
Exactly. And basically what that means is that we come out of reality into conceptualization. We start thinking again rather than being in the experience of the here now. Well, that's the key then, because basically, let's label this point that we're talking about, this enraptured state of being at one with everything, and a great satisfaction, a joy that comes with it. That state of mind is worth keeping. It's worth keeping. It's not worth letting the ordinary mind of hindrances come back in. Therefore, we want to actually give ourselves a little bit of a job, a little bit of a task to do with this mind that is so fit already. I mean, this mind that we have that said one-ment, this unification of mind is worth keeping because it's so valuable in and of itself, because it has the ability to see. And so what we're going to do is use that to guard, to make sure that only wholesome things will be allowed into the mind, because any unwholesome things that come into the mind will drag us out of that state of satisfaction. All right. And those kinds of things that would be unwholesome that can come into the mind would be both thoughts and possibly feelings. Now, that does not mean that a feeling, because it comes, makes you automatically dissatisfied, but it can. In other words, if anxiety, if fear, if something like that occurs when you're in that state of great satisfaction, you can say, wait a minute, I see that anxiety arising, but it's not going to take me out of this state of complete satisfaction and joy.
Can I ask you a connection between feelings and that state? I've found recently in the last couple of months that almost very deeply feeling into a very deep sadness has actually been a gateway to accessing a state of great present moment awareness and a lot of joy. But it's there's been several times where that's almost been arrived at through allowing a deep investigation and a deep, I don't know, calm sitting with a sadness. And that's led to a kind of state of present moment awareness and great joy. But it was almost by not running away from almost like an abyss, like of suffering. From not running away from it, one was able to kind of move beyond it.
You're saying it exactly correctly. Let me say it another way. And sadness is actually a good example, though I often use other things. Normally, people, when they're sad, they don't like being sad. They don't like it at all. And in fact, that's what's suffering, is the sadness that occurs over the loss of something. That could be the loss of a laptop, or it could be loss of a wife, or a loss of a dog, all kinds of things that cause that sense of loss. and that sadness or grief comes in. That in fact, sadness and grief are really related. You could call it by degree, but there's other qualities in it. Because grief generally has some guilt in it, like I could have done it better somehow. But in any case, sadness and grief are mostly related, and they're lower feelings in the body. To where anxiety is going to be higher and anger is going to be up in the shoulders and this area. Deep grief and sadness is lower down. It can make you lose your bowels. Okay, loose bowels and all of this kind of stuff. So, butterflies in the stomach would be the same thing, being terrified. So, people don't like that feeling. But now you're saying, wait a minute, instead of just not liking it and trying to get rid of it and trying to find something that's going to make it feel better, like the woman who lost a dog is now going to go shopping for a new dog. In some cases, that might be the right solution, but a better way for her to deal with it is let herself be sad and mourn over the loss of the dog and get that sadness over with. But here, with being Dhammadus, we're going to add even an extra ingredient to that. And that is, yes, sadness is there, but it's not the boss. I am not going to be consumed by that sadness. It's just something there to be investigated. That, as I've said before many times, each person is an emperor of their own pile of dirt. And if there is sadness there, is that sadness going to grab you by the leg and pull you off the top of that pile of dirt? Or are you going to be emperor? You're going to let that sadness be there, even making friends with it, but you're not going to let it run your life or control you. You don't have to take the day off because your sister died yesterday.
Is that... I was thinking, because this all came when I went to that ecstatic dance festival. A lot of those moments where there's a sort of very, very deep sense of like unity and community and connection and love, really. But often there would be like this deep sadness that preceded those moments of really beautiful awareness. The Four Noble Truths, the fact that Buddha points towards suffering in the first noble truth, it occurred to me then that it's because suffering is a gateway to that kind of deeper understanding, rather than an actual description of reality. So it's not saying that everything is suffering. It's saying that there is suffering and that this is an essential place to be at for a while on one's journey.
The question would be, for a while, how long is while? Okay. So let's say it this way. If it were possible in advance to know suffering so that you could sidestep it, then that would be the superior way. But sometimes you got to step in it in order to get a load of it. And now you know to avoid it. But oftentimes what people say is, look at it, there's all this suffering, I keep stepping in it, oh, poor me, I need help out of this mess. That's the third option. That's the loser's position, but that's the position that most of us are in. How can you move from that position to say, wait a minute, I'm not going to step in that crap anymore. I'm going to start watching where I'm going. All right, so that's the major change. Am I going to be a sufferer? Am I going to be a victim of my suffering? Am I going to try to get someone else to help me out? Or am I going to be able to get myself out of my suffering and start watching for it so I don't step in it again? In fact, the amusing analogy that I use would be, instead of suffering, I would use the analogy cow pie.
Mm-hmm.
You know what a cow pie is?
I do.
And you know not to step in them. And you know what it's like when you do step in them.
Mm.
So you know to avoid them. And yet there are some people that are just stepping in cow pie after another after another.
Mm.
And they blame the cow pie, or they blame the farmer who doesn't keep his pasture clean, or they'll blame God for all of these cows, or whatever it is, but they won't take responsibility for it themselves. So that's the important quality about the first noble truth, is really that second noble truth. Who made this mess? Second noble truth says you.
Yeah.
You did it.
Yeah.
You're the one who has to watch out for the cow pies. Ain't nobody going to tell you where to step throughout your life.
Yeah.
So
True
that's
craving.
the major point.
Yeah.
So back to the quality then of these cow pies, or this suffering, as being the first noble truth. A lot of people are in denial, stepping in one cow pie after another, saying, cow pie, I don't see any cow pies. This is just the way this field is.
Mm.
This is the mentality that has the idea of the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree.
Mm.
It has the quality of leopards can't change their spots, that he's just being a good old boy, or that's just the way things are. This is the loser's mentality that's willing to put up with suffering because they don't see it clearly enough. So that's why the Buddha puts it as number one. Hey, if you cannot see that cow pie as a cow pie, you're bound to step in it. And then you're going to smell like a cow pie, and everybody around you is going to know you smell like a cow pie, and it doesn't matter what you say about it. You smell that way.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the way that we have to look at it, is I am responsible. That's the first and second noble truth together. Then we have the third noble truth, and that third noble truth is what we started about in the beginning, and that is to drop all of the world, literally the external world, and get to the world of the senses. When I say the external world, we're talking about a manufactured conceptual world that we have in our brain, or we have in our mind as a concept about what the real world is, and it's got all of the problems of people with all of its rights, rules, and rituals. And that conceptual world has part of the concept is that I want something from that world.
We inhabit that virtual reality, don't we?
Because, okay, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Rather than we are sufficient in the actual Brahma, knowledge of the Brahma, or knowledge. And by the way, there is actually a Pali word that is used here also. And that would be the Dhammakai. The full body of the Dhamma would be then the Brahman, or that expansive, big everything. The big all.
What Thai Nhat Hanh calls the cosmic body.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah.
There's a lot of different words for it. For many, many years, I called it good old whatever it is. Because it's unnameable. And we've known it is unnameable. It's been unnameable. Even Lao Tzu called it in the Tao Te Ching, the first opening lines of it are the Tao that can be said is not the Tao. Okay, and the Tao there is also this Dhamma, or Dhammakai, or the big Brahma, but it's just language for that there is something that happens when we open up to it, in the sense of opening our senses, rather than looking for an object to understand. but looking at nothing in particular and everything in general as best we can, and that we know that we can do this and get that state. And so it is actually a feeling that we're working with as part of that experience. And that feeling then has a word in Pali. The feeling is the feeling of piti that we call rapture. A better word for it would be in awe. Just ah. It's just enjoy the present moment because it's so expansive. It's so marvelous. And so many trillions of things are happening every trillionth of a second. Except that it's not trillion. You got to put a whole bunch of more zeros on that word trillion. Because of the enormity of the moment. And so we began to bake in that vastness. Now, this is what is called entering the stream. But a much better word would be diving into the flood. Because it really is a flood of so much stuff happening all at once. It's almost a marvel of why haven't I been paying attention to the fact that so much stuff is happening all at the same time. It's impossible to take in all this going on right now. And so this is the one of the ways to look at it, but the best way to do that is through working with Paticca Samuppada. The first thing is that we understand it with the cause and effect relationships as it goes through. But then in practice, we start working backwards so that we can catch the mind earlier and earlier. That the first time we begin to catch it is when we see the grasping and clinging and we begin to let go at that level. Then we back up into the level of intention or the ability to see how we want things. Then we back up into feeling. Then we back up into the mental quality of what is it that I experience? I do not experience the real outside world. What I experience is my own internal creation of that experience. And then we start going a little bit earlier than that, and we begin to see that creation process and how that works. And then we're down to the only point left is that point of consciousness is just letting it all literally hang out without trying to process any of it. By being objectless. But this takes a lot of skill to develop. It takes a lot of sati. And the important thing is that even though some beginners, beginner's luck, people can bring themselves right into it, and now they spend the next few years chasing that experience rather than getting into it systematically by knowing exactly the path that we go through to get there. And that's what the Buddha has to offer that is so marvelous. Because without the path that the Buddha laid out, this liberation through the knowledge of Brahma is actually nothing but a concept. It's something that we can hope for, and occasionally it will happen and we don't know how we got there. And so we make big of that experience. Oh, I had this experience. No, what you really need to do instead of having an experience occasionally is to develop the skills that it takes to go into that state anytime you want to.
Because actually experience is inherently separate. It's something that happened, isn't it? If it's
right,
you're immediately kind of separating it from your daily existence by labeling it as such.
You're right there.
So the question is, how do we use that map of dependent origination? What's the Pali term again? I don't know how to pronounce it. I've only seen it written. You mentioned it a few moments ago.
Paticca Samuppada.
Paticca Samuppada. Say it again.
Samuppada.
Samuppada. Okay. Paticca Samuppada. How do we use that as a way in practical daily life as a way of kind of seeing the chains of suffering that we bind ourselves in and using that map as a way of freeing ourselves from those chains? That's the big question.
Right. The way that we develop those skills is through the practice of anapanasati.
Yeah.
So anapanasati, properly practiced, will take us into this. Here's the thing that's really funny. In one sutta, they speak of it in one way, and in another sutta, they speak it as in another way. And it's really difficult for the students to put these things together to where, in fact, they are the same thing. That it's actually basically the, let us call them the adepts, or maybe the wizards. They already know the whole language. And so they'll have key words. And so they hop on this stone and then that stone and that stone. And then the other guy will hop on this stone and that one over there. And then the students are looking, wait a minute, they didn't go across that creek by stepping on the same stones. Therefore, something's wrong here. They're cheating us. All right. So here's how that happens is that the Paticca Samuppada is spoken of in one way, and then anapanasati is spoken of in a different way. But then anapanasati says that it is actually for the fulfillment of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And then you look at the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and they say, well, the 4 in the Sutta number 10, and it says there, oh, well, we're going to take the object of the 5 khandhas and the 4 noble truths. You go back to the Anapanasati Sutta, and it says, oh, we're going to take the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and then we're going to take the 7 factors of enlightenment. And the students say, wait a minute, here is 4 noble truths, there is 7 factors of enlightenment. But if you look at them very carefully, you'll see that, oh, it's the same thing. Because what is the Sambhojana, the first item on the list, is unremitting sati. The second one is unremitting investigation. The third one is unremitting energy or effort. Well, now we're talking about here, we've already named 3 of the 8-fold noble path. And you just go right down through there and you say, wait a minute, they're talking about it the same thing in different language.
Do you think that's part of the genius of the Buddha, is that he kind of one man laid out several different ways into?
Actually, maybe the problem is that we just don't speak the same native language that the Buddha did. That the guys around him, they knew these connections within the language. So when he would say some word, they would know exactly that he meant this other word over here because of the connectedness between the 2 of them. But he uses this word in this context and this word in that context, but he's pointing at the same thing and everybody knows it. Until we get an English dude from Oxford to go to India and then try to take this strange language and try to make sense out of it. And that's the translation problem. That's why I was so grateful to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa with the Thai, because the Thai people, they've had the sutras for hundreds of years, and they know how to translate it a whole lot better than what's translated into English. And so this is why it's so much easier to understand when you take it from that context rather than trying to approach it from the Western context of reading sutras and going to this Western teacher or that Western teacher. For instance, Vedanta doesn't look that close to Buddhism until you recognize, wait a minute, they were in the same place at the same time talking about the same stuff. They were just using different language. That they were using Brahman in a particular way, and the Buddha used it in another particular way. But then the Westerners read it, and they read it in a third way. And so the problem is with the words, but when we put all the words around it together, then we can understand, oh, dukkha and sukha are opposites. That if we can get ourselves in a state of sukha or satisfaction, that satisfactory state overwhelms dissatisfaction. So all we have to do is maintain that state of satisfaction. So this is the way that we begin to understand, oh, that's how we're going to practice paticca samuppada, is by seeing it from a state of satisfaction.
Mm.
So when feelings arise, those feelings arise and we can see them without them taking over.
Mm.
So that state of sukha now becomes wisdom.
Mm. It's a razor edge. That's a razor edge with the feelings. I find the feelings in some ways the most challenging because it's so, on this side of the razor edge, you're ignoring and suppressing them. And on this side of the razor's edge, you're indulging them and letting them take over. And it's a very fine line in the middle.
Which means they're not in charge. You know them, but they don't run the place.
Yeah.
And so that's the way that we begin to practice. So this is the practice of anapanasati that will lead us to the full understanding of paticca samuppada, down to that basic level that who's in charge here is not who I thought I was.
Yeah. So it's my daughter, Willow. Say hello to Bhikkhu Dhammarato. He's in Thailand. Hello. Say hi. He's teaching me about meditation and the teachings of the Buddha.
Uh-huh. How old are you?
How old are you, Willow? She's 6.
Do you speak English?
She does, but she's just not connected to the microphone that I am, I don't think. Can you say hello?
Oh, okay. She's close.
Yeah.
Hello.
Can you hear her? There she is.
Yeah. So are you in school now? I've got a daughter also 6 years old, but she went swimming today. Today is Saturday.
I think you'd quite like to go swimming today, wouldn't you? Yeah. We're having a yard sale today. We're selling a bunch of stuff outside the front of our house. We're very excited. Are you excited? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why are you excited?
It's a fun idea. She's setting up a shop. It's a fun idea. Selling all her old toys. Nice.
Cleaning house.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. We can continue to talk if she wants to sit there. That's fine.
Yeah.
Do you see all the trees and everything around? I live on a porch.
Yeah.
I live in a garden in a jungle.
It's beautiful. So the connection between Anapanasati and Paticca Samuppada.
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 Paticca Samuppada. The connections between the two. I think that's where we were.
Yes. Exactly so. That one of the key ingredients is the word in the Anapanasati Sutta called Sita Sankara. Mm-hmm. That Sita Sankara in the Thai language is translated as Jai rather than Manu. In other words, it's the Jai or the reptilian brain or the heart or emotions. So it's the emotional part of the mind. And that we want to start watching that, because those old sankaras, when they come up as feelings, will color our understanding of reality.
Yeah, I find that very experientially true, that the feelings act as a barrier or like a web that stops us seeing things as they are, and we see things completely through the lens of that feeling. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So what we then do is begin to say, okay, I can see that feeling directly, and therefore is not going to begin to color or is not going to continue to affect the way I see things. For instance, I bet that this cute girl right here can also have a tantrum from time to time when she doesn't get
Mm.
what she wants.
It's been known to happen. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So how do you feel when she has a tantrum?
Oh, it can be hard. It can be hard. You can get very
Okay.
impatient, frustrated.
Angry.
Yeah. Let's call it what
Okay.
it is. It can you can get angry.
Okay. And underneath that someplace is fear.
Mm.
Oh, if she continues to behave that way, she'll be a miserable human being.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So under there that experience. Okay, so now you've got something to look for.
Mm.
Because when you're in a state of satisfaction and then she has a tantrum, what are you going to do?
Mm.
Are you going to get angry like you would normally, or are you going to not get angry and let it out? You're going to have that anger. I'm going to see that anger, but I'm not going to give this daughter anger. I'm going to
Mm.
give her something better than that. I'm going to start teasing her when she's
Mm.
having a tantrum.
Mm.
And I tell you this while she's listening, because now she knows it's coming. Your tantrums are not going to work anymore. They're going to laugh at you when you have a tantrum. How do you think about that?
So younger brother we want to watch out for. He's the worst ones at the moment. Um,
Well, she's getting out of it now. 6 is about time to get
yeah,
out of it.
yeah. She is. Um, it's hard. Yeah, it's interesting though that being around, being a parent or being around young children and the feelings that come up, um, and using it all as an opportunity to be present and using it as an opportunity to see feelings but not be kind of dominated by them. And I've noticed in the last year where my practice has become a lot more consistent, that I am much more able to show some patience and awareness when things get tough. Not all the time.
That's excellent. That's
Mm,
exactly how we want to practice.
mm,
So that those feelings of anger or sadness or whatever, they can be there. They're not going to run the show. They're not going
mm,
to pull me into a state of dissatisfaction. I'm going to
mm,
remain satisfied.
mm,
Going to stay in that Dhammakai. Going to have some of that Brahma. Going
mm,
to this present moment.
mm. It's interesting.
Enjoy.
I feel like often it's much easier to access that sense of awe, that sense of pity when I'm by myself. Do you think that's true for most people? Like, do you know what I mean? That when I'm like free of any responsibility, when I'm free of any.
Let her teach you how to be in that state of awe because she knows how to do it better than either one of us.
Yeah.
Kids really have that sense of wonderment.
Mm. He's taking his tongue out.
No, she'd already had it out. Okay. Well, I think that we've come to a pretty good closing point here,
Okay.
and that we will continue on next time with the discussion of how Anapanasati is, in fact, the way to practice Paticca Samuppada, including
Mm.
all of the language and all of the words that fit together,
Mm-hmm.
especially this issue of the sankhara, of the
Mm.
feelings that cloud the mind and keep
Mm.
the mind functioning in a way that leads us into suffering.
Mm.
So this is why it's such a key part of the teaching But once we understand what to look for, then all of the details of the teaching become unnecessary because we know what we're doing now.
Okay. Do you know what, that I think that's perfect for us to look at next time. I feel very much in my practice at the moment, my practice of Anapanasati, I'm becoming quite comfortable with the first tetrad. I'm becoming comfortable with the breath and the body and the stability there, and there's sukha there, and that exploration is one that I'm at home with. And then as soon as you start talking about feelings, I get a little bit like, what does that look like in meditation practice? So that's perfect if we can explore that next time.
Okay. But right now, you need to explore that for yourself. What does it feel like to feel good? What does it feel like to be really, really powerful? What does it feel like to be Brahma? You are that. Thou art that. So get in touch with that you're the champion here. You're the lion.
Okay.
You are successful. And what are you successful at? Managing your own life in a brilliant, beautiful way. And so that's how you feel. That's how you feel. Work on that. That's a skill to be developed. The skill of feeling like a champion.
All right. That's a lovely message to end our chat on.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Say bye, Willow. Bye.
See you.
See ya.